Okay, so we're going to speed up a little bit here, and I'm going to dive straight into the for loop. Okay, so a lot of you might know what the for loop is, but what the for loop actually is it's a way in which we can continue or iterate a certain bit of code over time to kind of just kind of repeat it. Okay, so it'll make sense in a bit, but I'm going to start in my Notepad++, and I'm going to start by writing for. Make sure it's activated. For. Then I'm going to have open my parentheses, close those parentheses, open a curly bracket, press enter, and then close a curly bracket. Okay. So that is actually finalizing the whole thing that is everything that needs to be in a for loop. Right. So that is the syntax that we have. Make sure that we end it off with a semicolon. Now, the important thing in a for loop is how long it's going to run, right? And that comes from a variable. So there's a variable in these brackets here. So I'm going to go a variable, which means we need a $sign. I'm going to call this variable x. And this variable is going to start, this variable x is going to start at 0. Okay? So I am going to iterate from 0 and continue running whatever code I put in here until I get to another number. Okay, so that other number is this second entry here in my for loop. So I'm going to press X again. So it's for X starting at 0 until X, or for X less than, let's say, 10. Okay, so this for loop is going to run as long as X is less than 10. And for us to make sure that it's actually over time X is changing in value, what we're doing is each time this code runs, X increases in value, X increments by 1. That means that each time this loop runs, each time this, like everything in here runs, it means that X gets 1 added to its value. And when it gets to, well, you can see it's less than 10. So when X gets to 9, this for loop will stop. Yeah, so what do we want to happen in there? Let's go back to the basics that we know. So we're just going to go to polysphere. And so what does that mean? That means that we are going to create 10 polyspheres. Well, 10 spheres, right? So copying across to Maya. Let's get my outliner up and let's run it. Awesome. So that means that for X equals 0, X less than 10, then X increases in value by 1, and each time this loop runs, then it creates a polysphere. So it's creating a polysphere every single time, right? And that, I mean, loops are incredibly useful for all kinds of things. And this is also a very, very basic one, but we'll find out more interesting ways to use them later. Okay, so I'm actually going to use, let's declare a variable for the name. So let's go string name equals, what is it? What have we got? It's got geo loop sphere. Okay, and yeah, that's what we need for now. I'm just gonna go add my flag. We know our flag pretty well. Oh no, flag is name. Right, actually, let's go S name, just so we don't have any clashes. Anyway, just making sure our variables are named correctly. So I go there we go. So now I've named it correctly, loop sphere. Let's add another variable, which is going to be our int, or actually it's going to be a float, isn't it? So float radius. So this is going to be the value that is the radius for each individual sphere. All right. So let's go to what do we want to be. So default is 1. So let's go 0.1. 0.1. Great. Now, and yeah, so we set flag radius to radius, the variable radius, right? So again, we run that, and you can see 10 times it's created a sphere with the same name and the same radius. But how do we use this loop to actually change these values as it goes? So the only number that is changing as we run through the for loop is this variable x, right? So remember, each time this for loop runs, x is incremented by 1. So the first time the loop runs, x is 0. And the last time the loop runs, is x equals 9. And each one in between is just ticking up. So it's just counting up from 0 to 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right? So that means that each time this loop runs, the x value is changing. So how about we times the radius by... How about we times the radius by the value of x? And instantly, I'm just going to my view there. What's happened? Each time it's created a new polysphere, it's created that sphere with a radius of... So the first sphere is actually going to be... it's actually going to be 0 because it's actually going to be 0.1 times 0. But the next one is going to be 0.1 times 1, which is... Yeah, so this one actually failed. So we'll actually fix that problem. So that's actually something we need to look at. But the first one, so at x equals 1, then the radius is going to be... We can actually look at the attribute editor. So the radius is going to be 0.1. And we can tick up as we go through. At least we step through, you can see that each time it's gone through the for loop, it's increased the radius by the multiplication of x, right? Now, what we need to do is we realize that the first one, so the first time it goes through the loop, the value of x is 0, and the radius of a circle or a sphere can't be 0. So what we want to do is we actually want to change the value at this point to actually x plus 1. So what we've got now is every time it iterates through, it's actually times the radius by x plus 1 because we don't want to start with x at 0. So even though the first time we go through the loop, x's value is 0, we're actually changing that by adding 1 to it. We're making sure that the value, the first time it goes through, is actually going to be 1, right? So I'm going to run that again. And this time, every single one, we don't have that broken sphere anymore. Every sphere is increasing its... Kind of see that, it's pretty cool. It's increasing its radius every time we go through the loop. Right. Now we can even go a little bit further. So let's go with the sphere. And whenever I move something, let's have a look at our code. So I moved it, and you can see it's actually running a move command, which is, very easy, isn't it? So if we look into it, let's see what this move command is actually doing. It's moving, and you can see there are 3 coordinates here: x, y, and z. So everything you always see in that kind of, in that form, in that vector form, what you're going to have is you're going to see that there are x, y, and z. So I'm just going to change it to test. I'm going to change all the values of that move to 0. Right, so when I create, so they should just be created on the origin. Nice. Now, but just like we use the x for the radius, let's say I use x in every time I create a polysphere. Each one of them is moved by the value of x. That means as x goes up, each one should hopefully not only the radius should go up, but it should move in the x-axis, the distance that x is. Right? So let's do it. Bam. Right. So clicking one button did that. Awesome. So this is just a for loop. I mean, we can use for a million different things. So, so that's pretty much what the for loop is. But I mean, what we can actually do as well is actually introduce some maths, which is terrifying to a lot of people, but in general, it's very, very, very useful too. Okay, so my radius is going up here. I'm going to leave it that way. But what I want to do is, instead of just having it move linearly, so as in it's just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I'm going to use some maths to make it actually do something slightly more interesting, right? So let's make it exponentiate, right? So as it travels in one dimension, so I'm just going to do it because, I mean, depending on your knowledge of maths, we'll see. So as it moves in the x-axis, so it's going to move sideways, it's going to go up. Let's use some maths, which are in this and in MEL. Use pow. So pow is power. So we're going to go, let's go x to the power. So this is the syntax for power, to the power of 2. Right? And so what you'll get, I'm just going to add some brackets there, make sure everything's kind of demarcated. So what we're going to get is it's going to move in the x-axis, going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. But when it goes up, it's going to take x and then square it. So the value of 0 squared is 0, the value of 1 squared is 1, the value of 2 squared is 4, the value of 3 squared is 9. So what we're going to have is we're going to have an exponential growth of it going up there. So let's go. So you can see we've actually just drawn a curve, which is weird, right? So let's I want more spheres in there, so the curve is actually nicer. Let's actually change our range to 50. So I want 50 spheres created. I also want maybe less distance between, or a bigger radius actually. Let's get a bigger radius. And let's just play around with some of these numbers. Yeah, exactly. There we go. So I've just drawn, just through basic maths, drawn out a curve in spheres, which I know sounds bananas, but that's exactly what we can do. And that is something that we can use in so many different ways. Just being able to use code to move objects and to create different kind of shapes, right? Yeah, well, I mean, that's pretty much just the for loop. I know that one was confusing, but it's a very important one too. Okay, thanks guys.